Would you rise, please?
Please be seated. I would ask if there's any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, our first presentation is something that I am personally very proud of. We have a presentation from Shelley, Candel, Director of Bee City Canada, to make a presentation. I'm hopeful that at the end of this, Councillor Jaworksy will convince you all to move a motion to recommend that our region be designated as a bee region. It will be the first bee region in Canada. The organization Bee City Canada is part of a North American movement to support pollination protection. Bee City communities support collaboration and establishment to maintain healthy pollinator habitats within the municipality or First Nation boundaries. A Bee City begins conversations about how to grow local healthy food and how to reduce or eliminate chemicals that are harmful to pollinators, our food system, and the planet. Several area municipalities have already applied for and been designated as bee cities or townships: Kitchener, Waterloo, and Wellesley. So I would now call on, and I would also direct Council's attention to some pieces of correspondence that we have received in support of this designation. Kim Fellows and Jennifer Marshman, and they will be in your packages. I believe you do have one of the letters, and one of the other ones just came to our attention. I would now invite Shelly Candel, Director of Bee City Canada, to come and make a presentation. Welcome, Shelley.
Thank you. Good evening, members of Regional Council, Regional Chair, staff, and guests. So I'm really very honored to be here today. So I'd like to share a little bit about Bee City Canada and how the region of Waterloo can inspire and be a role model to the rest of Canada. So Bee City Canada got started in March of 2016 when the City of Toronto voted unanimously to become the first bee city in Canada. So they went from a hog town to a bee town. So we became a charity, a registered charity a year later in 2017, and we're modeled loosely after Bee City USA. So our goals: to engage and inspire communities to protect pollinators. So what is a community? Well, communities include cities, and we define cities to include townships, municipalities, and hopefully a region, and also First Nation communities. But a community also includes campuses, colleges, schools, businesses, and in our businesses, there's a zoo and a church. So requirements for a bee city: there's an application, a resolution that must be signed by the mayor or someone in charge, and the commitments are to the 3 pillars, which is to plant healthy habitat for pollinators, to educate staff and residents, and also to celebrate. Third week of June is National Pollinator Week, and there's a yearly renewal. So 3.5 years later, we're now coast to coast. 32 bee cities across Canada, 29 bee schools, 8 bee campuses, and 14 bee businesses when I wrote this, but we just got 2 applications, so there's now 16 bee businesses in Canada. Our plans for the future: creating a free online registration for residential pollinator gardens. It's really important to engage residents, what they can do to protect pollinators. Organizing bee city workshops to give an opportunity for bee cities within 150 kilometers of one another an opportunity to share and learn best practices. And of course, in this region, there's Kitchener, Waterloo, and Wellesley, and hopefully you could bring in Guelph and Stratford. Continuing our free online buzz webinars, inviting experts to speak on various topics. and implementing our Bee City Ambassador program in schools across Canada so that every child will know the importance of pollinators and learn what they can do to protect them. And as a charitable organization, we want to ensure that at least 80% of all of our proceeds are directed to the bee schools. Okay, the region of Waterloo as a bee city, inspiring the rest of Canada. So I want to tell you that I just returned from a conference in Montreal where I was invited by one of the sponsors to give a presentation. Apimondia is the largest gathering of pollinator researchers and beekeepers in the world. It's held every 2 years. There were over 6,000 people in attendance. Well, what did I learn? Well, worldwide, the news is grim. Native bees and other insects that pollinate are in serious decline, and many species of bumblebees are close to extinction. The honeybee in most regions around the world, including most parts of Canada, is not healthy and suffer from numerous parasites and diseases. And the problems for all pollinators stem from a lack of healthy, biodiverse habitat whose foundation requires healthy living soil. So let's dream a little. Perhaps 121 future bee schools in the Waterloo region. Maybe everyone would know the difference finally between a bee and a wasp. Engaging students in this region on how to grow food. And beautifying the region's downtown spaces. The image you see is from West Queen West. It's one of the busiest, trendiest neighborhoods in Toronto, Queen Street. And there are 70 concrete bee-friendly planters, each designed by a local artist and filled with edible plants that attract pollinators. And I'm happy to report that no one was stung or no one complained either. There were bee hotels installed above some of the planters, and this year, they took the mint from the planters, they put it in a cooler, and went to the local bars. Why? To make amazing mojitos. So perhaps in addition to Oktoberfest, maybe the Waterloo region will host a September Fest and serve up mojitos. Perhaps there'll be murals of local pollinators. This is an image taken from Toronto, and the sweat bee is the official bee of the city of Toronto. Maybe you'll use local sheep and goats to weed. This is an image from Chestermere, Alberta. They used to use Roundup, glyphosate, and they wanted to reduce the toxicity of these herbicides. So they brought in the goats. They did a great job. And so that you know, they also take care of Phragmites as well. Floral gardens. This is an image from St. Catharines. This is an image from Kawartha Lakes. They use bee-friendly plants because, of course, not all of the annuals are bee-friendly. Many of them have insecticides in them. And engaging the many faith-based communities that are in your region. This is an image from Peterborough. It's a United Church, and they became the first bee church in Canada. They got a lot of press from this, and in the United Church Observer, it reads, as a faith community, if we don't look after the planet, we're missing something. And the heroes of climate change. Can we help farmers create healthier soils and plant more biodiversity in their fields, so in turn the soil can sequester carbon, mitigate flooding and drought, bring back the bees, and lastly, and just as important, put more money in their pockets? So just show a short video.
Paul Kernelligan and Aaron Dancy were worried about their farm and that they wouldn't be able to feed their cattle.
We were in some wet years. What we were growing, barley and oats, kept drowning. Got the idea to try something else.
They opted to change their fields and embrace sustainable, regenerative agriculture.
We've mined our soils, and our soils are going the wrong direction. And so this is the whole idea of regenerative ag, is we don't want to sustain what we are. What we want to do is we want to build on our soils. We've lost about 2/3 of organic matter in our soils. It's time to build it back.
By mixing in plants that grow at different rates, Elmy says the soil's nutrients and the bees are returning.
The bees function as a biological barometer. The more pollinators you have, the healthier the soil and the field. And Candel and Dancy say sustainable agriculture has brought back their bee population.
Definitely, yeah, the alfalfa might have had some, but yeah, the flowering species we have now, you definitely see more.
And they say the return of bees is good for business.
When you get higher quality in your feed to the animal, then that obviously comes through in the milk side of it.
We feel our cows are healthier, they breed back better, they produce a lot more butter fat and butter protein, milk protein.
The improvements even caught the attention of General Mills.
This is all important to, trying to rebuild that soil health from the areas where we source the ingredients, because ultimately to move into the 21st century, to be able to cope with the big challenges that we have, we need a healthier soil base.
Those challenges, like soil depletion, are significant. But Kerneligan says the bees are a sign that he's found a solution.
It's encouraging. It kind of lets you know that they're happy with what you got and you're helping out the ecosystem, I guess. And it's just such a small thing to do.
Nathaniel Dove, Global News. 6 years.
The honeybee teaches us many things, and one is that their individual effort over their lifetime is to only produce a third of a teaspoon of honey. This may seem inconsequential, but collectively, when they function for the good of the hive, they can produce 80 pounds of honey per year. We too may think our individual actions make no difference when it comes to our global problems, but collectively, our individual actions will produce the honey needed to solve all of our problems. So I'll just leave you with this little cartoon. Look, Dad, a bee. Quick, get a rolled up newspaper. And he says, thanks for all you do for this planet, little bee. And with that, I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I don't see any questions, so I will thank you very much for your presentation. It was very enlightening. And next we have Peter Kevan, President of Bee Cities. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, Karen, and for the rest of the councillors who are here for entertaining a few words from the international scope of things. I'm actually the president of the International Commission for Plant Pollinator Relations, which has membership in most countries around the world and is a scientific member of the International Union of Biological Sciences, and I served on the executive committee of that for a number of years. I was the director of the Canadian Pollination Initiative and was involved in pollination Guelph in the very early days. And it's with great pleasure that I've come to know my friends and colleagues in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, and I'm now part of that as well. So that gives you a little bit of my background. And what I want to do is just to bring greetings from the International Commission of Plant Pollinator Relations to this group. And I'll, of course, be sending that out and letting everybody know around the world that we're doing this. And depending on the outcome, which I certainly hope is positive today, that we will become a bee-friendly or a pollinator-friendly region and embrace pollination as one of the essential ecosystem services that we all depend upon for our food and for general sustainability. And particularly, I think it's interesting that it's being considered extensively in regenerative agriculture. And this has been brought up by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations as well. So this is a world movement. And the area of Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph has been a pioneer in doing this. And certainly I can invite the group in the region of Waterloo to become a member of the International Commission for Plant Pollinator Relations. It doesn't cost anything. It's just a matter of letting me know, and I will work with other people here to sort of make sure that that happens if that is the desire of the council. So greetings from the International Commission, and it's a great honor to be here, and it makes my heart feel so good to have been involved in pollinator conservation issues since about 1971. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I see no questions. The next presenter is Erica Shelley, Chairperson, Waterloo becoming a B region. Welcome, Shelley. Or Erica, sorry.
That's okay. There was some confusion about that when we have Shelley and Erica Shelley. Thanks so much for allowing us to speak today about the region becoming a B region, as it were. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Erica Shelley, and I am one of the members. We have several members of the B City Kitchener Working Group. Peter, that's here today, and Ramon, and I'm not sure if we have any others from B City Waterloo, but it's really nice to see the representation. I've also been working with my own business, Best for Bees, for the last 10 years on working for advocacy for pollinators, so it's really nice to see this come to the regional level, and hopefully we can see some changes. So why are we even talking about bees? Well, quite simply, our lives depend on it. 1 out of 3 bites that we eat, that is directly pollinated by a pollinator. So Whole Foods markets went ahead and they removed all of the produce in their produce aisle that was directly pollinated by a pollinator, and over half of the produce was gone. Now, maybe you're not a big fan of produce. If you go down your coffee aisle, you're also going to see that missing, and chocolate. And if you like your potato chips and they use oils for that, you're also going to see them missing as well. So it's going to hit most of us pretty hard if we aren't protecting our pollinators. Also, 90% of our wild plants are pollinated by pollinators. And that means that our oxygen comes from these pollinators. So we actually need these pollinators not only to eat, but also to breathe. Now, we have a Bee City Kitchener. We have a Bee City Waterloo, which is great, and we've been doing some fantastic things on that front. But if you take a look at our little region, which I know this group is particularly probably familiar with, you'll notice that actually only represents a small fraction of the entire area that we have to work with, that we could increase our pollinator habitat. And a lot of this, we're working in urban settings with Kitchener and Waterloo. We can also work out in the rural settings as well. So we can do projects that unifies the current bee cities with the entire region. We can also provide continuous pollinator habitat, what we call highways or corridors that allow pollinators not have big gaps of looking for food. We can also include these small townships or communities that don't have the resources that would allow them to create habitat, either from a monetary or a volunteer perspective. And finally, the region of Waterloo has been a role model in so many environmental initiatives. And you know what? To be the first is pretty awesome. It's going to be known not only here and not across Canada, but across the world as well. I was just thinking about some of the potential projects that we could do as a bee region. These are just some ideas. Pollinator pathways, as I was mentioning, we can do them along highways, we can do them along regional roads, we can do them along hydro corridors, but when we have everything connected, we can do all of it. We can provide resources for farmers. So like Shelley showed in her video, a lot of the farmers don't know how to plant for pollinators, even on the peripheries, what they can do to help our pollinators. So providing those resources. And we can have entire school districts. So we can do the Catholic School Board, we can do the Waterloo Regional District School Board. That's a lot of children and a lot of schools that we can educate about how important pollination is. We can celebrate with festivals, we can provide education, new developments, we can include education on how to make pollinator habitat in those places or to conserve what's already there. And all the regional properties that we have, we could also include in our pollinator plantings and gardens. Unfortunately, my fellow member, Kim Fellows, who is with Bee City Kitchener, was not able to be here tonight because she is co-representing us at Kitchener and Bloom's festival this evening. But she asked if I would share something with you. And this is Kim Fellows is actually the person who brought Bee City Kitchener to Kitchener. So she was sort of the person who got us here. So her letter says, I actually can't read that up there, so I'm going to read it here. Says, Dear Chair Redmond, as a Kitchener citizen who advocated for Kitchener to become a Bee City, I applaud your efforts to have the region of Waterloo certified as a Bee region under the programs of Bee City Canada. Thank you for recognizing the critical interdependence we have on plants and their pollinators. Over 90% of the world's flowers need to be pollinated by an animal, a pollinator, and these plants offer us medicine, textiles, dyes, essences, food for wildlife, and of course, food for human consumption. Additionally, these plants provide us with so-called ecosystem services, such as oxygen generation, nutrient cycling, climate regulation, erosion control, and even some recreational landscapes exist thanks to pollinators. These are just some of the benefits we enjoy from plant-pollinator interactions. I'm hopeful that the members of Regional Council will also realize the need to protect pollinators and their habitats. This is a great opportunity for the region to show other municipalities that harmony between our economy and our environment is not only achievable, but vital for the reasons above. As Dr. Guy McPherson said, if you think the economy is more important than the environment, try holding your breath while counting your money. Best regards from Kim Fellows, advocate for Bee City Kitchener and member of the Bee City Kitchener Working Group. So with that in mind, I really hope that we have a positive outcome for today regarding our Bee region. I'm excited to be a part of that, to just come as a representative, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I guess I would also just echo some of the highlights that have been made. I know Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Nowak ushered in their New Hamburg and Wellesley Fall Fair, and one of the things that kept coming back was that farmers feed cities. So I think there is a real sense, probably felt more strongly around this horseshoe than a lot of places, that we understand the interdependence of our rural townships, what they provide, and the vibrancy of the city. So thank you very much for coming. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jowett, question?
Yes, thank you, through the chair, and thank you very much for a great presentation. I'd be remiss if I didn't suggest that maybe we approach Cambridge and include them in a regional decision such as this, certainly, and to join our other partners in the region. So hopefully you can make contact with our city and engage them in this journey with you. Yeah, thank you.
And just to be clear, Mayor McGarry and I did talk about this when we were unveiling something along the river in Cambridge this past summer, and they're very keen. It's something that we hope all of the cities and townships will eventually join in. And on that note, I will go to Councillor Jaworksy.
Thank you very much to the chair. You know, it was Earth Day 2018 when we received our Bee City certificate for Waterloo and Kitchener, having done a joint Earth Day event at Kiwanis Park. And I remember how excited all our parks and recreation staff were there that council supported us. This is something that was exciting for staff as well, and adopting the Bee City program. And Barry and I were there, and that's why to this day we call each other honey.
Too much information.
So, the proposal. Whereas the goal of Bee City Canada designation is to promote healthy, sustainable habitats and communities for pollinators, that bees and other pollinators around the globe have experienced dramatic declines due to land fragmentation, habitat loss, use of pesticides, industrialized agriculture, climate change, and the spread of pests and diseases, with serious implications for future of health of flora and fauna. And that cities, townships, First Nation communities, and the residents have had the opportunity to support bees and other pollinators on both public and private land, and that supporting pollinators fosters environmental awareness, sustainability, and increases interactions and engagements among community stewards, and that by becoming a bee region, this region of Waterloo can highlight initiatives already in place and further engage local communities in an environment of creativity and innovation, which will promote a healthier life for our community, and further, that staff be authorized to submit the Bee Canada application to designate the regional municipality of Waterloo as a bee region, Now, therefore, be it resolved. It's good, eh? I'm good, eh? That the Region of Waterloo accepts the designation and commits to the standards of the Bee City Canada program.
So that is moved by Councillor Jaworksy, seconded by Councillor Foxton. Any comments? All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you for coming for your presentation, and we look forward to working with the townships and cities within the region who are not bee designated to make sure that we all cross this line together. So again, thank you very much for coming. So next, we have the minutes of the previous meetings. Closed council, August 22nd. Council, August 22nd. Community Services, September 10th. Administration and Finance, September 10th. Closed Committee, September 10th. And Planning and Works, September 10th. I would entertain a motion to pass all of those unless there's any questions. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Lorenz. All those in favor? That is carried. The communications package you should have received electronically if there's any questions to that correspondence. Seeing none. Motion to go into the Committee of the Whole to consider reports. Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? That is carried. For reports, I can entertain one motion on the finance reports. Start on page 2 and go over to halfway down page 4. I would entertain one motion to pass those unless somebody has questions. Councillor Galloway.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to, and I don't imagine Mr. Dyer has the answer, so he can provide it at a later time to me, but on the fencing matter, the difference between the two bidders is considerable. It's well over a third or even 40% between them, and often when that happens, at least my concern is that somebody's made a mistake that we're going to end up having to deal with. Then I looked at the financial implications, and staff did allocate, let's say, considerably more money in the budget for that particular item. So I don't imagine, and I didn't forewarn Mr. Dyer of this, but I just wondered if I could, if staff were able to comment on that or get back to me at a future date.
Mr. Dyer, is this something you want to get back on? Okay, thank you. We'll take that under advisement. Councillor Strickland.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd like to deal with the finance report on the improvements to the Research and Technology Park Station separately on page 25 and speak to it.
Okay. So given the concern that you have, Councillor Galloway, are you willing to vote on this now, or do you want it deferred? You're willing to vote on it? Okay. So I would entertain a motion for first and seconding all of the financial reports except the interior demolition of Frederick Street. Is that the one you want to speak to, Councillor? Oh.
The Research and Technology Park Stationary.
It's number G, right? Okay. Someone prepared to move the rest? Councillor Clark, Councillor Armstrong? I see no questions. All in favor? That is carried. Okay. Recommendation G, Councillor Strickland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I recognize the work needs to be done, but when I read the report, I was concerned that it's $438,000 over budget, and the reason that it's over budget is because we're tendering it when everyone's really busy, and the report itself says that the prices are inflated because of how busy contractors are. So my concern is, why would we issue the tender now and pay a $438,000 premium and work some magic out with financing and change some budget lines around and issue debentures? There's no reason why this project can't wait until December or January for tendering and to start in the spring where we get better prices.
Thomas, would you like to speak to this?
Largely, we were trying to get this project done because we have made commitments to the university and Evolve, the building right next door to the station. So we have been trying to get it done and have that station be the look that we had originally planned. I suppose having said that, there's also no reason that we couldn't look at deferring the project till next year. So,
Councillor Strickland?
So Madam Chair, so just in terms of process, you know, I don't want it to be awarded, so do we just take no action with this tender and then staff re-tender it in December or January, or we defeat the recommendation? I just want to make sure the process is correct here.
Okay, I think staff will speak to it. I have a couple other speakers, and then I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Depending on the answer.
I was going to suggest that maybe we defer this to either the October 1st, I believe there's a special council meeting there, or to the next council meeting, and give staff an opportunity to review this tender and then come back.
Or not.
Or not.
Okay.
Okay.
My understanding is a motion to defer doesn't allow debate, so Councillor Strickland, I'll come back to you. I'm going to take other questioners and come back to you.
Sure.
Okay, I have Councillor Harris.
Sorry, me? Oh. Thank you. I guess, you know, we're almost a bit past, you know, the line here on this. This decision to perhaps, you know, deal with this is beyond the point now. You have a company or companies that have publicly bid a tender, have disclosed pricing. I mean, I'm just not sure the net benefit of you know, deferring or canceling this tender or reissuing a tender under the same scope. I'm curious to know, you know, obviously any legal remedies that maybe we would have to deal with here on this particular one. You know what? I'll just go back. For years, we paid a significant premium on IC&I stuff, and now this is obviously civil. We didn't have to deal with it, but you know, I'm of the opinion that if the work needs to proceed, we've went with it in a public manner. We've tendered it out, and companies have responded. I'm curious to know why other local firms haven't responded to this particular tender. But now that the prices have been disclosed and the tender's been closed, you know, have we in the past, in fact, deferred or canceled tenders in this case? I guess it's just a question for me.
Mr. Dyer?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, it's not, it doesn't happen often, but occasionally it does come up. The other is certainly if there's insufficient funds. You know, one comment I would make is that there is a final date of acceptance that isn't until November. So certainly just deferring the matter until the next meeting and staff can report back on potential courses of action is certainly, I think, a feasible approach at this point.
Okay, Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. I'd like to second the motion. In the township, we have deferred and we have canceled ones that have been over budget, waiting for a better option in the following season. We are aware all the staff are very, very busy, and I thought I brought to this council a few years ago that our tenders for paving and that have to go out in December, January to get a competitive bid because all the crews are already booked by the summertime and fall.
Okay, Councillor Renz.
Well, and I'll certainly support that. I believe there's a number of tenders that contractors haven't even bid on because it's so late in the year. I mean, Councillor Foxton is right. These need to be done early in the spring so these companies can plan their work for the season. So I have no problem in supporting this.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to Councillor Strickland.
So I'm pleased to hear the support, and I'll move that we defer it, subject to further advice and consideration from staff to the meeting date. Which meeting? Council of October 9th.
Okay. And Councillor Foxton, you want to second that? Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried.
Okay, thank you.
So we're now on to committee reports. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Oops. I move the Community Services Report and the recommendations pertaining to the Paramedic Services response times, the Paramedic Services Master Plan, the Transitional Child Benefit and the Community Capacity and Innovation Grant Funding Plan. And I want to note that correspondence from Luke McCann with reference to the Paramedic Services Master Plan was received by Council. I would also move the closed Community Services recommendation that the region endorse the nominations of Sharon Spall, EHOR or IHOR Sarita, and the students of Galt Collegiate Institute for the 2019 Ontario Heritage Trust Recognition Awards.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Foxton. No discussion. All those in favor? That is carried. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to bring forward the report from Planning and Works Committee and add to it 2 items from the closed session of last week. The first item is a settlement of a property associated with the light rail transit project. And the second one is a property at 605 Herb Street West in Waterloo.
So that's moved by Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Murray, do you have anything? No? Other matters under consideration for Committee of the Whole? I'll entertain a motion for the Committee of the Whole to rise and Council to resume. Moved by Councillor Lorentz, seconded by Councillor Vervanovic. All those in favor? That is carried. A motion to adopt proceedings of the Committee of the Whole, moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Schatz. All those in favor? That is carried. No motions. Any notices of motion? Unfinished business? Other business, Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been sent a petition, which I would like to pass on to staff, if I could. It's got to do with Fountain Street, and if I could forward it, I'd be pleased to do so.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong.
Just a reminder, this Sunday we are celebrating 25 years of the museum at Castle Kilbride from 1 till 4 on the front lawn. Bring your chairs and enjoy some music, and well, I know the chair is going to be there to help us lead in the singing.
Right. I come and do audience really well. I don't sing or dance.
I hear that, because I understand it. So, but yeah, just a reminder that it is, if you're going to come out and enjoy it, and bring your chair.
That's a great celebration, and your fall fair was wonderful too in New Hamburg, as was the one in Wellesley. We have an addendum, and I would ask Mr. Schmidt to speak to this one. It's the advertising program for GRT. Oh, do you know what I've got? Is this about? Okay. So, Councillor Lorentz, would you like to move the motion, the recommendation?
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation. I would also ask for a recorded vote.
Okay, Councillor Strickland is seconding it. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. I am not going to support this motion because of one bus that, in my opinion, was offensively wrapped. I think that anything that is of ambiguous or questionable character should actually be given to the inside rather than the outside of the bus. But I just wanted to make that common knowledge. I thank Councillor Renz for making it a recorded vote.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, do you want to speak to the motion at all? Okay. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Oops. Yeah, I'm also not prepared to support the motion. I think that when we made a decision regarding not putting advertising on our trains because we wanted the brand to be a dignified one that would reflect well, not just on the region, but on our passengers. And I think the same rationale should apply to the buses. I think that I understand that we're bound to follow the advertising standards, but I just feel that does not give us enough control of what we put on the buses, and I do think that the comfort and the dignity of our passengers has to be valued highly.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you through the chair. I'd like to also stand with my colleagues in that I don't particularly believe that the sponsors aligning with the mission, vision, and values of our region. And I'd like to express that as well. So I'm looking forward to a recorded vote. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand some of my colleagues' perspectives on this, and some have spoken that the reason for not approving this is because they take issue with one of the clients that's currently on one of our buses. And I just would like to, reassure the viewers and the public that all of our advertising complies with the freedom of speech and our Constitution, the Advertising Standards Council of Canada. So everything's in compliance with all the regulatory requirements for advertising on buses. So I think it's while some things are uncomfortable for some, they're comfortable for others, and we have regulatory and regulations in place, regulatory bodies and regulations in place to govern those kinds of things. And as long as our advertising complies with those regulations, I don't think we have much of a choice but to approve them. In terms of the revenue, this is something that we've been doing in the region for, at least 25 years. $425,000 is not an insignificant sum. Earlier tonight, we approved in principle, subject to budget approval, a program for low-income transit users, which is going to cost our budget an additional $681,000. So we have to look at ways in which we can raise revenue over and above achieving that through tax increases. And we want to fund new programs, which we think are very worthwhile. If there's an opportunity to fund some of those new programs through advertising revenue or non-traditional means, then I think we need to consider it. I think it's our duty and our fiduciary responsibility to do so. So I have no problem supporting this recommendation, Madam Chair.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. I'm opposed to the recommendation for much of the same reasons that Councillor Foxton articulated. I understand the desire to get additional revenue in any way that we can. Wrapping the outside of the bus, the fact that we are following the rules is fine and good, but I guess we then have no control over what goes on the outside of the bus other than what's in those rules. And, and unless we can have some kind of control and make it look, sorry, I'm getting my words wrong, but make it look classy, I guess. The wrapped buses just don't give a good impression of the region in my mind, so I am opposed to the wrap.
Councillor Rentz.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll just pick up where Councillor Strickland left off. We're talking about almost $17 million here, and I haven't heard anybody suggest where the shortfall is going to be coming from if this recommendation is turned down. That's an awful lot of money. I've been in politics for over 30 years. I've never heard one person complain about the wrapping of our buses. Lots of other things, but not that. So I'm not exactly sure, why we're even discussing this, but I certainly hope that members of council will support this because, we're looking always to enhance our programs, to do different things, some new innovative things, and it all takes money. And when we're looking at a deficit of $500,000 a year for the wrapping and the guaranteed almost $17 million, where's that money going to come from? So sometimes you need to vote from the heart, sometimes you need to vote from the pocketbook, and I think turning down this recommendation would be a bad thing for this council to do, and I think the citizens of this community would be the ones that end up paying for it. Thank you.
Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too am going to support this recommendation for the same reasons that Councillor Strickland, Councillor Lorenz have stated. My feeling is that we can't ignore the fact that close to $17 million is out there, and we need to have revenue for some of the other programs that we want. And this is one way of doing it without taxing the public. And so for that reason, I'm going to support this recommendation.
Councillor Harris.
Yeah, obviously there's a bit of disagreement perhaps on the staff recommendation. I will too also be supporting this. I believe Councillor Strickland, summarized my comments up very well. There are clear regulations that we leave others to police. We cannot, as politicians, be, at language or poster police. So I'll allow those guidelines that are in place to be evaluated in terms of assessing potential advertising, and of course, not to make it an urban rural divide, but those that are assessed, especially in the urban areas and have to pay for this, have expected revenues from this stream of advertising to help offset ridership and fares and other costs. And so for that reason, I'll be absolutely supporting the recommendation.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. Just for some clarification, because Councillor Strickland stated the amount of $425,000, which is correct. Councillor Lorenz mentioned 17 million, which is correct also, but the 17 million is over the term of the contract, where the $425,000 is for the year. I feel a lot of my colleagues are not against the general policy. We are just against this one, which has, in my opinion, sexual connotations, which is below the dignity of regional council. I think that when you voted against putting wrapping on the ion, this was one of the cases that made that decision, in that you didn't have the same control, and therefore you did not want it on the ion. If it's not good enough for the ion, why is it good enough for GRT?
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Perhaps a question to just clarify the numbers for me. I don't have a problem with advertising in the interior of the buses. It's just the wrap that is of concern to me. Can someone just clarify whether those two numbers both just reference the wrap, or whether it's the total advertising?
Mr. Schmidt, can you shed some light on the numbers?
So my understanding is the wrap, the 425,000 is an annual number. For the purposes of the 10-year contract, that would work out to about $4.25 million of the 16.675. So if you did not approve the wrap, you would have to reduce that 16.675 by 4.25.
Thank you.
I've got one. Councillor Lorenz.
Well, my point of order is that it's one recommendation.
Okay.
So you turn down the recommendation, you turn down both parts of it.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, in our discussions on this, the wraps, I think the primary concern with the wraps was the visibility from inside and outside. And I think that was the primary concern that people had at the time. That's what we talked about. And I think as far as the interior advertising and what you're talking about is the offensive stuff, I think we should, obviously, the standards need to be revisited. And I think maybe we need to revisit how we determine what is good and what is bad. I think that is something we need to do, because, you know, it could happen anywhere, so it's something that we need to do, I think. We need to step up and say, okay, let's revisit this, and we can eliminate those.
Councillor Shantz.
Is what Councillor Rentz said true, that we can't separate this out? It's all or nothing?
We could entertain an amendment and take them separately if that was the wish of council. Councillor Jaworksy.
I had the same question. They look like two recommendations to me, so I just wanted to make a point of clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Shantz, did you have additional comments?
I would like to separate the two out, if that's possible.
So should we like to take recommendation 1 separately from recommendation number 2?
No, I don't think.
Or do you want to separate out the bus wrap amount?
The bus wrap.
Contract is structured. I don't know if we can.
Somebody like to weigh in, staff, and talk about the contract and how it's structured and if this is even possible to do?
The contract is structured to allow you to not accept the wraps. So you could say we don't want to do the wraps, and that would be the $425,000 annually. So that could be accepted or rejected, either way. If it was accepted, then item 2 stays exactly the same as it is. If it is rejected, then item 2 the 16.675 would change to 12.425.
Okay. Councillor Strickland.
You know, I'm fine if you take them separately, but I'd just like to point out that for number 1, some of the concerns expressed by my colleagues are with respect to taste. They find one of the clients that is currently on our buses is distasteful to their particular views of what should be in the public realm and what not should be in the public realm. And I think that, as I said earlier, we have certain standards in place to govern that, and we comply with those standards. So not everything you're going to advertise is going to please everyone who's looking at it. And if you say no to bus wraps because of that issue, then what are we going to do with the advertisings on the inside of the bus? There's nothing to stop that particular client that creates concern for members of council to go onto the inside of the bus and advertise there. So you're not going to solve the problem, and I think that it's a problem that this council doesn't need to solve. I think it's a situation that's left for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and Free Speech and the Advertising Standards Council. Those are the groups that make decisions on what's suitable for Canadians to see with advertising. So I don't think you're going to solve the problem, and I think just going down this path is a very slippery slope with respect to advertising and advertising standards. So for me, it's either all or nothing, because we can't really be in a position, from my perspective, to legislate what's good taste and what's poor taste. We have bodies in this country that do that.
Mr. Murray?
Yeah. I just wanted to add something, and I think I've got this right, and I'm just going to look to Mr. Schmidt and Mr. Dyer. So the $425,000 refers to bus wraps. In addition to that, as Councillor Strickland said, there's also advertising on the inside of the buses, but there's also other advertising on the outside of the buses, separate and apart from the full wraps. Is that right? No, Thomas, is that only?
The 425 includes full wraps and half wraps. So that is for all of the wraps. So it's not just the full wraps.
So this is all exterior advertising on GRT buses?
Not all, just the wraps. So we do full wrap and we do a half wrap. There are also other posters that wouldn't be impacted by this, is my understanding.
Okay, so we're clear about this, that we're talking about separating these two motions. Motion 1, which speaks to $425,000 income, is half wraps and full wraps. It's not posters, and it's not all exterior advertising on GRT buses. It is simply the full and half wraps. That's a clarification, Mr. Schmidt?
Yes, and the reasons that were given for, the reasons that that was done was largely because of their concern of impacts on customers. So when staff did this, it was looked at from because of the concern that customers had with it obstructing view, and in some cases we have some buses that have a darker tint. As part of this program, we would not be putting any wraps on the buses that have the darker tint, and any of our new buses do not have a dark tint on them. But that was the reason for it, not any concern with the content of those wraps or that advertisement.
And that would speak to Councillor Armstrong's earlier point. Councillor Jaworksy.
Sorry, all my questions have just been answered by Mr. Schmidt. Thank you.
That was brief. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I have had complaints. I have heard complaints, not just one or two. I think you're trivializing the matter when you say it's simply a matter of taste. That's not the case. There is a qualitative difference between the signs that are, an experiential difference, I'll say, between the signs that are on the outside of the bus and the signs that people might see inside the bus. For one thing, there are different kinds of signs. If you ride the bus, you'll see that people are advertising in different ways, the companies are advertising in different ways. When you see a sign that you are uncomfortable with, you simply look away, and that's fine. But when you're boarding a bus that has emblazoned on its side something that makes you feel uncomfortable, disrespected, anything like that, you have a different relationship to that sign. So my concern isn't about the taste or otherwise of the ads, it's about the dignity of our passengers.
Councillor Erb.
Well, as I recall, this has been a discussion around this horseshoe for more than this term, that it's been debated quite heavily. I support the recommendation. I think we have to rely on the authorities that are in place to determine if something's appropriate or not. And it feels to me like council is all of a sudden becoming the adjudicator of what we want and what we don't want. And if we say we don't want this certain company to advertise this year and the new contract comes up and there's going to be another one, council is making some decisions. I don't think that's in our purview. And so I think that's a decision that we should be leaving to other people to make.
Thank you. Councillor Verbanovich.
Thanks. I just have one question, because I know part of the sensitivity is the issue of degree of wrap and so on. I was down in Toronto for a meeting earlier today, and I noticed that their vehicles, which appeared to be fully wrapped, actually didn't cover all of the windows. They left, I would say, 2/3 roughly open, so that it didn't necessarily interfere with the ridership experience, but still allowed for the full wrap to happen. Is that something that we've contemplated here, or is that what you're referring to as a half wrap?
Mr. Schmidt.
A half wrap is literally on half of the bus, not basically down the middle on one side or the other side of the bus. I can't speak to whether Toronto has a specific policy on the wraps they allow, or if it's just that on any one particular bus, that particular wrap only covered half of the window. We don't have a policy or anything that says you can only cover 1/3 or 2/3 of the window. We do allow a full wrap that it completely covers the window, but we do require that the material that's used has the most holes in it, so it basically is the most, lets the most light in, is least obtrusive on customers that you can use in producing these wraps.
So I guess my question to you, though, is that something we could have a discussion with the vendor about, that we you know, if it's the will of this council to allow these full wraps, part of the concern is the user experience. And I recognize there's user experience in terms of that issue, and then there's user experience in terms of those who may have concerns around the content of some of the ads. Is that something that staff could work on with our supplier?
We can obviously speak to the supplier about that, but our contract doesn't, to my knowledge, specifically have any clauses that we could say they're only allowed to do 1/3 or 2/3 wraps of windows. Our contract is permissive of allowing a full wrap, but that doesn't prevent us from discussing the design of the wrap. We just have no way.
And then potentially working that into the contract is my point.
I think going back and renegotiating the contract, I mean, it's an option, but is pretty difficult for us to do at this point. We can, in the design process, obviously try and have wraps that are have the least impact they possibly can have, but our contract as written did not have a specific requirement to allow us to mandate the amount of wrap on a window.
So I guess from my perspective, I would certainly like to see us follow up on that with the supplier, and in the future, I would certainly like to see us look at that, see what some of our other major urban transportation services are doing, and seeing if that's actually a change we should make to a future contract.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Councillor Bravanovic, for the creativity that you're looking to put out there. No creative solutions are going to come without the debate at this table, in my opinion, and we're not looking, I don't believe that my colleagues are looking for censorship. We're merely looking for constituent pride, but more meaningfully, our strategic plan says leave no one behind, and I believe that this is part of our strategic plan going forward. Whenever I'm in a dilemma that engages my head and my heart, I tend to go back to my old Rotarian roots and I say, is it the truth? Is it fair? Does it build goodwill? And is it beneficial to all concerned? I don't believe that this is beneficial to all concerned. So I'd like to see us find a new roadmap to work with here. And I think that there's enough intelligence around this table that we can come up with something.
So I'm going to take, I guess, the privilege of the chair and just say, refresh everybody's memory. This is 5 buses, is that right, Mr. Schmidt, that we're talking about?
That's correct, 5 buses.
How many buses do we have in the fleet?
273. 5 buses with a full wrap, and there can be basically an unlimited up to the full 273 for half wraps, but we've never had anything even close to that.
Okay, given the economic times, one of the things that I was keen to have brought to council, as you will recall, is if there was an appetite to actually wrap more buses and inflate this figure. I am not insensitive to the discussion that we have had, but I do believe that in these times, this is a source of revenue that's going to help us continue to do the things we need to do that reflect our values, which is subsidizing bus fares for low-income people who are needs tested. And I think there always is a balance. I respect everybody's opinion. I will take the motion in 2 parts. So the first recommendation is the one that deals with the bus wraps. That's the $425,000. And as I recall, that was moved by Councillor Strickland and seconded by Councillor Lawrence, and he asked for Jeff moved it, Sean seconded it, according to the clerk, who is never wrong. So Councillor Lawrence has asked for a recorded vote, so we'll vote on them separately.
In regards to recommendation number 1, and you can start vote. And vote.
So that vote is carried 10-4. And the second recommendation is the one that contains the larger sum for the 10 years, just over $16 million. And that again was, do you want that moved by Councillor Strickland and seconded by Councillor Lorenz? And again, a recorded vote? Okay.
Start vote. And vote.
And that vote is carried 13 yes to 1 no. Good debate, Council. Any questions? I'll entertain a motion to enact the bylaws first, second, and third readings. Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? That is carried. Would now entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Jowett, Councillor Armstrong, oh, Councillor Harris. Everybody wants to adjourn. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, colleagues.